Talking about this concept of the wounded healer. And the reason why I'm talking about the wounded healer is because I think that wounded healers are exactly what the world needs right now. I think it's no exaggeration to say that we're in a mess. And so the wounded healer actually holds, I'll say, an energy that's inviting and reminding and calls us into our greatest knowing. So I'm going to start with sharing. I didn't share this the first time because I thought I'd be too sensitive and wouldn't make it through, but I think I'm going to pull it off. So this person here is Bishop Carlton Pearson. He was my mentor for a number of years, and he, I would say, showed me my potential. But when he first tried to show me my potential, I said, nah, I'm good. What he did was he exposed his transformation to the world. He exposed his transformation in public, and it cost him a lot. He lost his church, he lost his home, he lost everything by exposing his transformation in public. And I said, why would you do that? And what I did is I studied similar things that he studied and kept them to myself and held them inside because I didn't want that smoke. I had already had enough from the world. I just wasn't ready for it. But today, I want to hold that energy that he held as best I can to be able to talk about the wounded healer, because Carlton was a wounded healer. So I'm going to start with a quote from the creator or inventor of the Polaroid. Let's see if that magic pops up. Oh, yeah, let's try it again. There you go. All right. If you want to generate new ideas, you probably need to stop holding on to old ideas. Make sense? All right. So the inventor of the Polaroid was a guy named Edwin Land. And back in the day, I'm sure everybody's familiar with a Polaroid, right? Pull out that little film and you can expose it to the light, and it reveals the image that you captured. But before Edwin Land, with his new idea came out, you had to go into the darkness. You had to stay in the dark and expose everything in the dark, because if it got exposed to the light, it would destroy the photograph. And so everything had to happen in the darkness. But with this new invention that he created, the very same technology, but what he was able to do was he was able to somehow contain it within a thin film so that all the same processes that happened in the dark could be exposed to light and accelerate and then reveal the image, right? And I've discovered, like stick my flag in it, I've noticed that often when things happen in the world that seem to be taking the world to a very dark place, at the same time, there's something else that's bringing the world to a greater potential of light and love and all the things that we celebrate in this community. And at the same time that Edwin was working on his Polaroid, we were at the height of what is now called the nuclear age. We were learning how to devastate the world with weapons. And at the same time, he was showing how to reveal things through light, through technology. And there's this guy named Michael Nesbitt, wrote this book called Megatrends. Anybody familiar with it? Any businessy people? A few hands. So Michael Nesbitt said that whenever you have high tech, you have to have an equivalent high touch. If anywhere technology goes up to one degree, then on the other end, we could say the things that make for wholeness, the things for making for human relating, all those things have to go up as well. And so that's what was happening at that time. And metaphorically speaking, when I think of someone like Carlton, he was like the Polaroid for his kind of journey, because he exposed his journey, his struggles, and all the things he went through to the light. And when he did that, others could do the same, likened to Christ, who we've heard the stories, a lot of us have heard the stories all our lives, that Christ, or Jesus, in the embodiment of Christ, went through some suffering, and after they say he rose, whether you take it literally or not, he was, right after that happened, Do y'all remember what happened with the guys, his apostles? Do you know where they were after Jesus supposedly resurrected? After the women, sorry, there's somebody talking about it, it's all right. So the women all saw Jesus at resurrection, but the men were doing something. What were the men doing? Hiding. The men were hiding, right? And so they say that Jesus appeared to them while they were in there hiding, and there was one person that was missing. Do you remember who that was? Thomas. Thomas wasn't there. And now I'm asking this is a quiz. Okay, so what did Thomas say after his friend said, we saw him, he's back, man, can you believe it? What did Thomas say? I'm not believing it till I see the wounds myself. I'm not believing it till I see the suffering with my own eyes, because I can't believe that someone who's gone through that much can come back, right? Now, let's think about when you try to give advice to somebody. Who's ever tried to give advice to somebody who says to you, well, I don't believe it. You know, you haven't gone through what I've gone through. I can't believe it unless I see that you suffered like I've suffered. Then, only then will I believe it. That's a common human trait. We tend to do that. Parents who have kids, just saying. That's how it goes, right? And so it's through the exposing of the suffering and exposing through the wounds that it shows people that they too can make it through. Now, what happened, this talk is called The Wounded Healer, and that comes from this guy, Henry or Henri Nouwen, however you want to pronounce it. And he talks about that same time frame that Edwin Land was coming up with the Polaroid, this nuclear age was exposed. For the first time in human history, people were not just concerned that the future might be hard, they were afraid that there would not be a future at all. And that did something to our collective imagination. Because for the first time in history, we created technology that could eradicate a lot of people in a little bit of time. And what that did to a lot of people's imagination was like, what if I don't have a future at all? And so that started to degrade the way we experienced ourselves and the way we experienced others because of that fear, that very real existential fear. And so this idea of exposing your growth and your development to the light is to show people that they do have a future, that we do have a future, that we've gone through things, but yet we're still whole. So I'm gonna invite y'all to say, I am wounded, but I am whole, unless you've never been wounded. So I'm wounded, but I am whole. How often have you heard that concept that you could be wounded and whole? But that is, oh, you heard? That's awesome. But that is the situation of all of us, that we might be wounded, but we're also whole. And when we know that we're wounded and we're also whole, then we can invite other people into their wholeness. And that's part of what I've learned from this guy, John Rennish, who wrote this book called The Great Growing Up, which is about coming to the world from a place of wholeness, a place of consciousness, and taking responsibility for our experience, taking responsibility for the moment we're in, and taking responsibility for the world that we're co-creating. And so the invitation for us is to be able to do that, to be able to put ourselves out there in a way that invites others into their possibilities and their potential. And often, every Sunday, we just did it today, we tell the kids, we see the Christ you are. And recently, they told us, we see the Christ you are. What kind of community and what kind of world could we create if we could all see that in each other? That's what we do here, but what if that got exposed way out into the world? Which brings me to this book, I Am by Stephen Shaw. And in this story, there is this guy named Stephen, and he encounters a Christ-like figure named Jay. And he's traveling, and he runs into Jay all the time. And then he realizes that this guy, there's something about this guy. And so at some point, Jay starts doing some miracle-type things, which kind of scares Stephen. And then he tries to usher Stephen into the realization that he can do it too. And he actually is out on the ocean, kind of hanging out, surfing with no surfboard. And he says, come on out, Stephen. And Stephen's like, no, thank you. Now, he could read Stephen's thoughts and speak into Stephen's mind. Now, how many of us would like to hang out with somebody like that? Because they can read our mind and speak into our heads. You know, what would they hear, right? Would freak some of us out. And so he said, forget this, and he runs away, and he goes to this shop, and he encounters this guy, and he kind of talks to the guy a little bit, and then the guy says to him, coming to the awareness of your true self is kind of hard. You can continue to hold on to this identity that you have, or you can come into the reality of who you are, but that might require some letting go of some illusions, and that might hurt a bit. Now, how many of us are attached to things that we let them go, even things that are painful, we're afraid they might hurt because they're attached to our identity. And why are we afraid? Well, that brings me to our next quote, and it's from The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, which says, each person thinks that they have the formula for triumphing over life's limitations and knows with authority what it means to be a human. And they usually try to win a following for their particular patent. Today we know that people try so hard to win converts with their point of view because it is more than merely an outlook on life. It is an immortality formula. And what he means by that is that because we fear dying, we think to ourselves, if I'm alive, I must be doing something right. And whatever my survival instincts are must be working because look, I'm still here. And so that fear of death actually keeps us from exposing ourselves, of putting ourselves out there. Even I say for myself, like part of the reason why I didn't want to openly talk about my new thoughts was because I was like, this might bring something on me, and I'd already gone through stuff before. I didn't want to do it again. But when we get out of that trap, we actually expose ourselves and we get to understand some of the things that we already are doing but don't know we're doing, which brings me to the 12 powers that you hear about in Unity. That each of us has these 12 powers that we're using them all the time, but we don't always know it. But if we do learn them and we bring them to our conscious awareness, then we can use those powers to help transform our world. And for some of the powers that I want to lift up for how we can bring ourselves out into the world and share our woundedness and our wholeness at the same time are 3 powers that I want to pick up. One is, I'm going to try to do it from memory again. So imagination and Bartholomew. Yep. Okay. Love, which is John. And then zeal, which is Simon the Canaanite. Thank you. I got a thumbs up. I got them right. I'm trying to learn them all. Okay. So these powers, each of us inhabit these powers. And when we bring them to mindful awareness, we can use them to transform the world. Now, before I ever came to New Thought, one of the ways that I defined spirituality was infinite imaginative capacity. And so the idea is that if your imagination, with imagination, you can transform anything. Like, how many of you are familiar with Star Trek? Any Star Trek people? Right, okay. Has anybody seen when they first discovered warp technology? The story of that? Yep, there's a couple of heads shaking. Okay, so warp technology from Star Trek lore was turning a nuclear bomb into a ship that had the first warp technology, right? Am I right with Star Trek people? That's what the power of imagination can do. That's the high-tech equivalent of taking our swords and beating them into plowshares. It's taking our weapons and turning them into higher technology that can add to our capacity to be greater beings. So that's what imagination can do. With any problem we see, with the power of imagination, we can transform it and see it as something better. And then with love, whatever technology, whatever thing that adds to our life, we want that for that same thing for everyone else. That we spread that with love. To say, hey, what's good for me is good for you, and vice versa. And we just create that. And then with zeal, it gives us the power to go forward and actually share that into the world. And a lot of times we have imagination and we have love, but we don't have zeal. We're afraid of zeal because we don't want to sound like something. But we need that zeal to be able to bring about the world that we know is possible, which then leads me to this book, Birthing the Symbiotic Age by Richard Flyer. And I have a quote from Richard. He said, "The hardest shift is letting go of the head and learning to lead from the heart. In a world where only matter matters, we are conditioned to chase structural fixes. However, we need a spiritual transformation, trusting that love, not systems, is the true organizing principle." And He has studied different cultures and brought people together across all differences, seeing the beauty that all of us bring and talking about a symbiotic age. That's an age that moves from the nuclear age of fear and destruction, the idea that there's no future and the fear of death, to a new age, a symbiotic age where we work together, where we bring our differences to the table open-heartedly, wholeheartedly, creating a better world. There's a few members of our community just a few days ago who went over to Sister Carmen, which this community supports. And Sister Carmen supports people all in this Lafayette and Louisville, Boulder area. And one of the people who spoke, who has been given his life energy to Sister Carmen, when he talked about why he gave decades of his energy and life to Sister Carmen, he said this. He said, I did that because when I breathe my last breath, I want to know that Sister Carmen is still here doing good work for this community. So he wasn't attached to the idea of his own immortality. He wasn't using his immortality formula. He was using the gift of the life that he has right now, taking responsibility for the experience to help create a greater world. And he gave that life to that community and what they were doing so that it can continue to flourish and to grow and to expand into the world that needs that service. And that's the same thing that we do here. When we see ourselves as the Christ we are and we see others as the Christ they are, and we create community from that place of wholeness, then we are capable of extending life, not corporeal life, but the life and the love and the imagination, the zeal, and all those powers that we add with consciousness out into this world that needs it so much. And then lastly, The Way of Mastery, which is an interesting book that I know some folks in this community have also read. And it talks about taking responsibility for the time that we are in. And it says, the way of transformation, which is contained in the way of mastery, is the way of assuming responsibility for time, for each and every moment of it, every moment that we're in, as Karen's saying earlier. The time is not a present for you. It is that which flows out of you, or out of your very consciousness. And there is never a place or time, which is more conducive to the way of transformation than the place in which you are and the time that is now. Right now. When I knew I was going to speak earlier last week, I was thinking about what I was going to say, and we were at potentially the precipice of the nuclear age reemerging. And if that would have happened, I was looking at the clock and wondering, like, not only what's going to happen to the world, but what am I going to say on Sunday? And I was nervous about it, honestly. I teared up a little bit talking to Sue. I was like, but I didn't know what I was going to say. But then I realized that it's not so much about what I say, it's about who I show up as. How do I show up when I see these things? When I look at the news and I see the world that shouldn't be, how do I use my power of imagination? How do I use affirmative prayer? How do I use the things that we talk about here to see a world that is symbiotic, that is full of love, that is full of imagination? How do I be that person? And how do I see that person in other people? And how do we come together from this place of consciousness and expand that field of awareness so that more and more people get attracted into that field, realizing that they too hold this potential and that they can actualize this potential in community with others, seeing and being what is possible. And that's what we need right now. So when we see the news, it's not just like, oh no, what's going to happen? It's who can I be right now to invite in a world of greater possibility? Because who knows, there's a lot of kids here. Maybe one of these kids is going to be the person that turns a nuclear weapon into a spaceship. Who knows? But they only can do it when they're invited into living into the fullest of their imaginative capacities with the greatest love possible and with zeal, with the belief that all can be well and all is well when we choose to see it and we choose to be it. And so that's our invitation. And I don't want to put pressure on you, but I see the Christ you are. So go out there and show others the Christ that you are and the Christ that they are so that we can create a world that we know is possible. So it is.